The warning. The silence in the tactical analysis classroom was broken only by the soft hum of the environmental systems. Commander Kethvar of the Zentheri Defense Corps stood before 30 eager cadets, his 4 amber eyes scanning their expectant faces. The wall display behind him showed star charts of the known galaxy, with various species territories marked in different colors. Today we discussed the most dangerous species in the galaxy, Kethvar announced, his voice carrying the weight of decades of military experience. His scaled skin bore the scars of countless battles, and his ceremonial armor gleamed under the classroom lights. Cadet 09, one of the brightest students in her class, raised her primary arm. Commander, surely you mean the Krillian Empire. Their plasma weaponry has dominated 3 star systems. A ripple of agreement passed through the classroom. Several other cadets nodded, their head crests fluttering with anticipation. Kethvar's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. The Krillians are formidable warriors, yes, but they are not the most dangerous. He paused, letting the tension build. The most dangerous species in the galaxy stands barely 2 meters tall, has no natural armor, no claws, no venomous bite, and no telepathic abilities. They cannot breathe in most atmospheric conditions without artificial assistance, and their lifespan is shorter than most species' adolescents. The cadets exchanged confused glances. Cadet Tor 7, a bulky student with prominent neck ridges, scoffed. Commander, are you speaking of the humans? Those pink creatures from the Sol system. They barely achieved interstellar travel 50 years ago. Indeed. Kethvar nodded. The humans, and let me tell you why every military academy in the galaxy should study them, and why every commander should pray they never have to fight against them. He manipulated the wall display, showing a 3-dimensional image of a massive space station. This is Titan Mining Station, located in the asteroid belt of the Kepler 442 system. 30 years ago, I was a young captain assigned to protect this facility. It was a joint venture between the Zentheri Confederation and the newly admitted Human Colonial Administration. The image zoomed in, showing the station's massive mining arrays and processing facilities. The station was designed to extract rare minerals from the asteroids, minerals essential for faster-than-light drive construction. The operation was considered routine, boring even. That changed when the Nexus storm hit. Kethvar gestured to the display, which now showed swirling clouds of energy surrounding the station. A Nexus storm is a spatial anomaly that occurs once every few centuries. It creates electromagnetic interference so severe that all electronic systems fail. No communications, no life support, no artificial gravity. Most importantly, no way to escape. Cadet 09 leaned forward. How long do such storms typically last? This one was predicted to last 72 hours. Kethvar replied grimly. The station's emergency life support could sustain the population for 48 hours at most. There were 3,000 beings aboard that station. 2,000 Zentheri workers and their families, 800 Krillian technical specialists, and exactly 200 humans. The classroom fell silent as the implications became clear. The human contingent was led by Captain Lyra Blackwood, a former military engineer turned diplomatic liaison. I remember thinking she seemed unremarkable when I first met her. Average height for a human, brown hair, blue eyes, nothing that would suggest she was anything special. I was wrong. Kethvar activated another section of the display, showing the station's internal layout. When the storm hit, panic spread quickly. The Zentheri engineering teams calculated that even with strict rationing, we would run out of breathable air 6 hours before the storm ended. The Krillian specialists suggested we evacuate non-essential personnel to the emergency pods and jettison them into space, hoping some might survive until rescue arrived. A logical solution. Cadet Tor 7 commented. Perhaps, Kethvar agreed. But Captain Blackwood had a different idea. She requested access to the station's complete technical specifications and spent 6 hours studying them, while the rest of us argued about evacuation protocols. Then she did something that changed my understanding of humans forever. The commander paused, his expression growing distant as he recalled the memory. She called a meeting of all department heads. I expected her to present some minor modification to our evacuation plan. Instead, she stood before us and said, "We're not evacuating anyone. We're going to convert the mining equipment into life support systems." Several cadets gasped. Converting industrial mining equipment into life support systems was theoretically possible, but practically insane. The precision required, the time constraints, the risk of catastrophic failure. It was madness. I told her it was impossible, Kethvar continued. The mining arrays were designed to break apart asteroids, not recycle atmosphere. The power requirements alone would drain our emergency reserves in hours. She looked at me with those calm blue eyes and said, "Impossible is just another word for something we haven't figured out yet." Kethvar manipulated the display to show the station's mining arrays. What happened next was the most remarkable display of engineering ingenuity I have ever witnessed. Captain Blackwood didn't just convert the equipment. She completely reimagined how it could function. The mining lasers, originally designed to cut through rock, were recalibrated to break down carbon dioxide at the molecular level. The ore processors, meant to separate minerals from stone, were reprogrammed to filter toxins from the air. The gravity generators, used to move massive asteroids, were reconfigured to compress and circulate atmosphere throughout the station. Cadet 09 looked skeptical. "Commander, even if such modifications were possible, the time required to implement them would be enormous. You said the storm lasted 72 hours. Exactly right, Kethvar nodded. Which is why Captain Blackwood did something else that no Xanthari or Krillian commander would have considered. She divided the entire project into smaller tasks and assigned teams from all three species to work simultaneously on different components. The display now showed a complex flowchart of interconnected tasks and teams. She paired Xanthari precision engineers with human mechanics. She combined Krillian theoretical knowledge with human practical experience. Most importantly, she gave each team complete autonomy to solve their assigned problems however they saw fit, while maintaining coordination through a central communication hub. This approach violated every principle of hierarchical command structure we had been taught, Kethvar continued. Yet it worked. Within 12 hours, teams across the station were reporting breakthrough after breakthrough. The Xanthari human engineering team discovered that human duct tape, a primitive adhesive material, could create airtight seals that our advanced polymer compounds couldn't achieve in the storm's electromagnetic environment. Several cadets chittered in amusement at the mention of duct tape, but Kethvar's expression remained serious. The Krillian human theoretical team calculated that by running the mining arrays in a specific pulse pattern, they could reduce power consumption by 60% while actually increasing efficiency. Most remarkably, a mixed team of young technicians, beings who had never met before the crisis, developed a completely new method of atmospheric recycling that is now standard throughout the galaxy. Kethvar paused to let this information sink in. But the most extraordinary moment came 18 hours into the crisis. Our calculations showed that even with all these modifications, we would still fall short by approximately 4 hours of breathable air. The storm was stronger than predicted, and our power reserves were depleting faster than expected. I gathered the senior staff to discuss rationing protocols, essentially deciding who would receive life support priority in the final hours. Captain Blackwood listened to our debate for several minutes, then stood up and said something I will never forget. "You're thinking about this wrong. We don't need to ration what we have. We need to create what we need." The classroom was completely silent now, every cadet hanging on Kethvar's words. She led us to the station's botanical section, a small hydroponics bay where humans grew food plants. It was a tiny area, perhaps 50 square meters, containing what appeared to be simple farming equipment. Captain Blackwood explained that these plants didn't just produce food. They produced oxygen as a byproduct of photosynthesis. The problem was that the natural process was too slow to meet our needs. So she proposed something that seemed absurd: artificially accelerate plant growth using the mining station's equipment. Kethvar brought up an image of the hydroponics bay, now modified with strange additions. Using mining lasers recalibrated to specific light frequencies, they created an artificial sun that could run day-night cycles in hours instead of weeks. The ore processors were converted to create perfect nutrient solutions. The gravity generators created optimal growing conditions. In 36 hours, they had turned a small garden into an oxygen production facility that could sustain the entire station. Cadet Tor 7 raised his arm. "Commander, this seems impossible. Even with advanced technology, biological processes have natural limits." "You sound like I did 30 years ago," Kethvar replied. "That's exactly what I said to Captain Blackwood." Her response was simple: natural limits exist until someone finds a way around them. Humans have been doing the impossible for our entire existence. We survived ice ages with nothing but animal skins and fire. We learned to fly despite having no wings. We traveled to other worlds despite being bound to one planet. Extending plant growth cycles is just another problem to solve. The commander's 4 eyes focused on each cadet in turn. And they were right. Not only did the station survive the Nexus storm, but the modifications the humans designed improved the facility's efficiency by 300%. The atmospheric recycling system they created is now used on every major installation in the galaxy. The accelerated hydroponics technology revolutionized food production on colony worlds. But that's not why humans are the most dangerous species in the galaxy, Kethvar continued, his voice growing more serious. They're dangerous because they approach every problem with the absolute certainty that a solution exists. They don't accept limitations as permanent. They don't respect impossible as a concept. He gestured to the star chart again. Every other species in the galaxy has evolved to accept certain boundaries. The Krillians accept that plasma weapons have specific range limitations. The Valdori accept that their psychic abilities work only within certain parameters. We Xanthari accept that our engineering follows specific principles and constraints. Humans accept nothing. They question everything. They'd rebuild, reimagine, and reinvent constantly. They take technologies designed for one purpose and find 17 different ways to use them. They combine ideas that shouldn't work together and somehow make them function perfectly. Cadet 09 looked thoughtful. "Commander, you make them sound admirable rather than dangerous." Kethvar's mandibles clicked again, this time with something that might have been sadness. "They are admirable. That's what makes them so dangerous. Because when you fight a species that refuses to accept defeat, that finds opportunity in every setback, that turns every disadvantage into an advantage, you're not just fighting their weapons or their ships. You're fighting their absolute refusal to give up." The commander moved closer to the cadets. "I learned something else about humans during those 72 hours on Titan Station. When facing a crisis that threatened 3,000 lives, Captain Blackwood didn't sleep for 60 hours straight. She worked continuously, checking on every team, solving problems as they arose, encouraging everyone to keep working when exhaustion set in. On hour 68, when success was assured but the work was still ongoing, I found her in the maintenance section, personally installing atmospheric filters. I asked her why she wasn't resting, why she wasn't delegating this work to subordinates. She looked at me with those tired blue eyes and said, "Commander, these aren't my subordinates. They're my responsibility. Every life on this station matters equally. I can't ask others to take risks I'm not willing to take myself." The classroom was completely silent. That's when I understood the true danger humans represent. They don't just fight for victory. They fight for each other. They don't just solve problems. They take personal responsibility for every life affected by those problems. They don't just innovate. They innovate with the desperate creativity of beings who refuse to let others suffer if there's any possible alternative. Kethvar looked directly at Cadet 09. "You asked if humans were admirable rather than dangerous. The truth is, They're dangerous because they're admirable. Because when you face an enemy who will sacrifice everything to protect others, who will work impossible hours to find impossible solutions, who will never ever give up, you're not facing a military force. You're facing something far more terrifying. You're facing hope made manifest. The revelation. The cadets sat in stunned silence as Commander Kethvar's words echoed through the classroom. The Zenthari instructor allowed the moment to stretch, watching as his students processed the implications of what they had heard. Finally, Cadet 09 broke the silence. Commander, you speak of one incident 30 years ago. Surely this was exceptional rather than typical human behavior. Kethvar's 4 amber eyes fixed on her with an expression that combined approval and sadness. An excellent question, Cadet. One that I hoped someone would ask, because my experience at Titan Station was indeed just the beginning of my education about humans. He manipulated the wall display again, showing a new star system with multiple planets orbiting a binary star. 15 years after Titan Station, I was promoted to Fleet Commander and assigned to the Outer Rim Defense Initiative. The Vorthan Collective had begun expanding aggressively, conquering smaller systems and enslaving their populations. Intelligence suggested they were building toward an assault on the core worlds, including our own homeworld. The display showed red markers indicating Vorthan fleet positions advancing through space. The Collective had a significant technological advantage. Their ships were larger, faster, and armed with weapons that could penetrate our best shields. Worse, they had psychological weapons, neural disruptors that could incapacitate entire crews without damaging ships, allowing them to capture vessels intact and turn them against their former allies. Cadet Tor 7 leaned forward. How did the Alliance respond to this threat? The Galactic Defense Council assembled the largest fleet in recorded history. Kethvar replied. 1,200 ships from 17 different species. The humans contributed exactly 47 vessels, barely 4% of our total force. Several cadets exchanged glances. Such a small contribution seemed almost insulting. I thought the same thing, Kethvar acknowledged. The human ships were smaller than our cruisers, less armed than our destroyers, and carried crews of only 30 to 50 beings each. Their fleet commander was a former engineer named Marcus Chen, recently promoted from captain to admiral. He seemed entirely unremarkable. Average height, quiet demeanor, spent most of the strategic planning sessions listening rather than talking. The commander paused, his expression growing distant. The first engagement took place in the Rigel system. Our battle plan was textbook perfect, a 3-pronged assault designed to overwhelm the Vorthan defenses through superior numbers and coordinated strikes. We had every advantage except technology. The display now showed a tactical representation of the battle, with blue markers representing Alliance forces and red markers showing Vorthan positions. The battle lasted 6 hours. In that time, we lost 230 ships. The Vorthans lost 15. Their neural disruptors were even more effective than intelligence had predicted. Entire squadrons were incapacitated before they could fire a shot. Ships that weren't disabled were destroyed by weapons that seemed to bend space itself. But here's what I found remarkable, Kethvar continued. Of the 47 human ships that entered that battle, 45 survived. Not only survived, they were the only vessels that seemed completely unaffected by the neural disruptors. Cadet 09 looked puzzled. Were human minds somehow resistant to Vorthan psychological weapons? That's what we thought initially, Kethvar replied. Admiral Chen explained that human ships were equipped with what they called cognitive firewalls, sophisticated AI systems that could isolate crew minds from external influences. We requested these systems for our own vessels immediately. Admiral Chen agreed, but said something that should have been a warning. Commander Kethvar, we'll share our technology gladly. But remember that technology is only as effective as the beings who use it. These systems require constant manual override and adjustment. They work for us because we've trained specifically to operate them under combat conditions. The tactical display shifted, showing the second engagement 3 weeks later. We installed the cognitive firewalls on every surviving vessel and engaged the Vorthons again in the Altair system. This time, we were confident. We had their measure, we had their countermeasures, and we had learned from our mistakes. Kethvar's expression grew grim. The battle was a disaster. The cognitive firewalls worked exactly as advertised. They protected us from neural disruption. But they also required constant attention from crew members who should have been operating weapons or navigation systems. Our effectiveness decreased by 60% because half our personnel were occupied maintaining psychological defenses. Meanwhile, the human ships moved through the battle like dancers in a performance. Their crews somehow managed the cognitive systems while simultaneously operating their vessels with precision we couldn't match. They coordinated strikes, provided cover for our retreating ships, and actually disabled 3 Vorthon vessels using tactics I still don't fully understand. Cadet Tor 7 raised his arm. What kind of tactics? They used their own ships as bait, Kethvar replied simply. Admiral Chen's flagship deliberately drew fire from the largest Vorthon dreadnought, staying just barely ahead of its weapon systems while leading it into a trap. Meanwhile, smaller human vessels used the distraction to approach undetected and disable the dreadnought's engines with surgical strikes. The commander manipulated the display to show the maneuver. But that wasn't the remarkable part. The remarkable part was what happened when the dreadnought's engines failed. Instead of destroying the vessel, the humans boarded it. The classroom fell silent again. They boarded a ship containing 3,000 hostile aliens armed with psychological weapons and technology superior to anything in our fleet. They did this with assault teams of 12 humans each. Admiral Chen explained their reasoning. Commander, that ship contains intelligence about Vorthon plans and technology that could end this war. But more importantly, it contains 3,000 sentient beings who didn't choose to be part of this conflict. Most Vorthon crews are conscripts from conquered worlds. If we can free them, we gain allies instead of creating more enemies. Kethvar paused, letting the implications sink in. The boarding operation took 18 hours. The humans faced psychological attacks that would have left most species catatonic. They encountered weapons and defenses they had never seen before. They were outnumbered 250 to 1. They succeeded completely. Several cadets gasped. Not only did they capture the dreadnought intact, but they discovered that Admiral Chen was correct. 60% of the Vorthon crew were forced conscripts from 12 different conquered species. The humans not only freed them, but convinced most to join the Alliance fleet. But the most extraordinary part came next. Kethvar continued. The captured dreadnought contained complete intelligence on Vorthon fleet dispositions, battle plans, and technological specifications. The logical step would be to use this information to plan our next attack. Instead, Admiral Chen proposed something unprecedented, a rescue mission. The display now showed a new star system with a heavily fortified planet at its center. The intelligence revealed that the Vorthons were holding prisoners from conquered worlds in processing centers on their fortress world. Nearly 1 million beings from dozens of species being prepared for neural conditioning and slavery. The planet was defended by the entire Vorthon home fleet, over 300 ships. Admiral Chen requested a meeting with all Alliance commanders. I expected him to present a plan for attacking the fortress world after we had built up our forces. Instead, he said something that shocked everyone. We're going to rescue those prisoners, all of them. And we're going to do it now, before the Vorthons realize we have their intelligence. Cadet 09 looked incredulous. Commander, that sounds like suicide. Even with the intelligence advantage, attacking a heavily defended world with a depleted fleet. Exactly what I said, Kethvar nodded. Admiral Chen's response was typically human. Commander, every day we delay means more prisoners are processed and lost forever. We have 43 operational human ships, 420 Alliance vessels in various states of repair, and complete intelligence on enemy positions. Most importantly, we have something the Vorthans don't expect. Refugees from their own fleet who know their security codes and protocols. The commander's expression grew thoughtful. What happened next taught me something about humans that changed my understanding of courage itself. Admiral Chen didn't just plan a rescue mission. He designed an operation that would succeed even if it cost every ship in the fleet. The plan was elegantly simple and utterly terrifying. The human ships would approach the fortress world openly, broadcasting surrender codes they had obtained from the captured dreadnought. This would allow them to get close enough to disable the planetary defense systems. Meanwhile, the Alliance fleet would approach from the opposite side of the system, hidden by the planet's mass. Once the defenses were down, every available ship would converge on the prison facility simultaneously. The goal wasn't to defeat the Vorthan fleet. It was to evacuate as many prisoners as possible before the enemy could respond. The tactical display showed the complex maneuver, with hundreds of ships moving in carefully coordinated patterns. I asked Admiral Chen what would happen to the human ships after they disabled the planetary defenses. They would be surrounded by the entire Vorthan home fleet, with no possibility of escape. His answer was simple. "Commander, someone has to hold the door open while the evacuation proceeds." We volunteered. Kethvar's voice grew quieter. 43 human ships approached the fortress world broadcasting surrender. The Vorthans, believing they were accepting the defeat of the Alliance fleet, allowed them to approach within weapons range of the defense platforms. At exactly the planned moment, the humans opened fire, not with the intention of destroying the platforms, but with surgical precision designed to disable them, without triggering automatic lockdown protocols that would trap the prisoners. The operation was flawless. In 17 minutes, every major defense system was offline. The Alliance fleet emerged from behind the planet and began the evacuation. Transport ships landed at prison facilities across 3 continents, loading refugees as quickly as possible. But the Vorthans responded faster than anyone expected. The home fleet began converging on the planet within 30 minutes. The humans found themselves facing 300 enemy ships, with no possibility of escape. The commander paused, his 4 eyes focusing on something beyond the classroom walls. I was monitoring communications from my flagship when Admiral Chen transmitted his final message to the Alliance fleet. "All Alliance vessels, this is Admiral Chen. Evacuation is proceeding ahead of schedule. We count approximately 800,000 prisoners loaded and ready for transport. Estimate 90% rescue success if you begin retreat now." Then he said something that will stay with me forever. "It has been an honor to serve alongside you. Tell our families that we kept the promise we made. No one gets left behind. All human vessels maintain positions and provide cover for evacuation ships." That's an order. The classroom was completely silent. 43 human ships held their positions against 300 Vorthan vessels for 6 hours and 23 minutes, long enough for every single prison transport to escape the system. They used every trick, every innovation, every desperate tactic they could devise. They rigged their own ships with overloaded reactors and rammed them into Vorthan dreadnoughts. They created false sensor readings that confused enemy targeting systems. They broadcast contradictory orders using captured Vorthan communication codes, causing enemy ships to fire on each other. Most remarkably, they convinced 200 freed prisoners with technical knowledge to help operate their ships, turning rescued slaves into volunteer crew members in the middle of the battle. Kethvar manipulated the display one final time, showing the aftermath of the battle. When it was over, no human ships remained operational, but the evacuation was complete. 947,000 beings from 43 different species had been freed. The Vorthan war effort collapsed within months as their slave labor force disappeared and their conquered populations rebelled. Admiral Chen survived, barely. I found him in a medical facility on the Alliance hospital ship 3 days later. He was conscious but barely, connected to life support systems, and recovering from injuries that should have been fatal. I asked him why they had done it, why 43 ships had sacrificed themselves for prisoners they had never met, from species some humans had never even heard of. His answer was simple. "Commander, we didn't sacrifice ourselves. We invested ourselves. Every being we saved will go home to their families, will rebuild their worlds, will contribute to the galaxy's future. Our ships were just metal and circuits. Those people were irreplaceable." Kethvar looked directly at each cadet. "That's when I finally understood why humans are the most dangerous species in the galaxy. Not because they're aggressive or technologically superior or physically powerful. They're dangerous because they operate from a fundamentally different set of values than any other species. Most species fight for territory, resources, dominance, or survival. Humans fight for principles. They fight for ideas. They fight for the belief that every sentient being has inherent worth and deserves freedom. When you fight someone who wants your territory, you can negotiate boundaries. When you fight someone who wants your resources, you can find alternatives. When you fight someone who wants dominance, you can submit or establish hierarchy. But when you fight someone who believes absolutely in justice, in protecting the innocent, in sacrificing themselves for others, there is no negotiation. There is no compromise. There is no surrender." The commander moved closer to his students. "Humans are dangerous because they make every conflict about more than winning or losing. They make it about right and wrong. And they would rather die fighting for what's right than live with what's wrong. They're dangerous because they inspire others to be better than they thought possible. Those freed prisoners didn't just go home. They became advocates for freedom throughout the galaxy. Former enemies became allies. Entire civilizations changed their policies because they had seen what humans were willing to do for strangers. They're dangerous because they prove that physical limitations, technological disadvantages, and impossible odds are just problems to be solved. They show other species that we've been accepting limitations we should have been overcoming." Kethvar stepped back and looked at the entire class. "But most of all, humans are dangerous because they offer something more terrifying than death to their enemies. They offer redemption. They prove that former enemies can become friends, that conflicts can end in understanding rather than destruction, that even the worst situations can be improved through courage and sacrifice. Every species that has fought against humans and survived has been changed by the experience. We've learned not just new tactics or technologies, but new ways of thinking about what's possible. That, cadets, is why humans are the most dangerous species in the galaxy. Not because they're the best fighters, but because they fight for the best reasons. Not because they always win, but because they make winning and losing less important than doing what's right." The commander moved toward the door, then paused and looked back. "Your assignment for next week is to research one human innovation, invention, or achievement from the past 50 years. I want you to understand not just what they accomplished, but why they believed it was important, and how they overcame the obstacles in their path. Because if you're going to serve alongside humans, and all of you will, given current alliance protocols, you need to understand what you're working with. You need to understand that when humans say something is impossible, they mean it's difficult. When they say something is dangerous, they mean it's interesting. And when they say something is worth fighting for, they mean it's worth dying for." Class dismissed. As the cadets filed out, discussing what they had heard in hushed tones, Commander Kethvar remained at the front of the classroom, staring at the star charts that showed the peaceful galaxy that existed because 43 human ships had refused to abandon 1 million strangers to slavery. The most dangerous species in the galaxy, he reflected, were the ones who made everyone else want to be better than they were.